Hey everyone, and welcome to Assessment in the Music Classroom. My name is Casey Hall, and I'm a Fine Arts Education Program Specialist at the Georgia Department of Education. I'm here today to help facilitate an important discussion on the topic of assessment in the music classroom for all music teachers across the state of Georgia. So let's get started. Here's a brief overview of this webinar. First, I'll discuss the general purpose of assessment and how we as music educators can use assessment as a powerful instructional tool in our music classrooms and provide you with a little glimpse into my own personal experience with assessment. Next, I'll spend the majority of this webinar discussing the three types of assessment, formative, diagnostic, and summative, and how they directly apply to the music classroom, even though they may look different than other general education content areas. I'll also provide you with some broad examples of each type of assessment across all music content areas. Then I'll discuss some overall considerations for music educators when planning, facilitating, and using assessments in their music classrooms. Lastly, I'll provide you with some great resources that are currently available to you for free through the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts Department, such as our instructional resources for music, which includes several sample assessments in which you can use in your own classrooms if you need, as well as some other professional development opportunities that are currently available to you. Let's take a minute to talk about the general purpose of assessment. And you may already understand what assessment is and are watching this webinar to try to get some new ideas, and that's great. Or you might be a new teacher or a struggling teacher trying to figure out how we do assessment in the music classroom setting. So no matter where you are on that kind of spectrum of your educational teaching career, I wanted to lay kind of a foundation of what we're going to use the term assessment as in this webinar going forward and how it looks in the music classroom. So in education itself, the term assessment means the wide variety of methods or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, the learning process, skill acquisition, or the educational needs of students. It's a very scholarly way to put what assessment is, but in layman's terms, assessment really is about the teacher trying to figure out what their students know and what their students don't know. And then how we as teachers use that insight to inform our instruction. So, if our students are in point A and we want them to get to point B, we are the bridge. That's our job as teachers, is to get them from what they don't know to what they need to know or what they want to know. That's our job, really. And I found this quote from Victoria Bowler, and I thought it was so applicable to kind of what we're kind of talking about here. And what she said was that we don't assess because the state says we must. We don't do it for our principles. We don't do it because it's trendy to track data. We do it because we need to know what our students need from us. And I thought that painted such a clear picture of what assessment is. It is trying to figure out what our students need from us, and so that we can deliver it to them. And it really is like at the core of what we do as educators. And so I want to take a minute or two just to be vulnerable and share my own personal experience with you, because it might be something that you can relate to yourself, whether you are a seasoned music teacher or you are a brand new teacher who's just trying to figure it all out. To me, assessment was more like stressment. I was very overwhelmed by the words assessment, data, things like that, because I really understood assessment in theory, especially like taking all the college classes that discuss assessment and all the different types of assessment that we're going to talk about later. But then, once I was a teacher, the actual practical applications of that in the music classroom is very different. And on top of that, seeing the hundreds of students I saw a day, and then even more times the whole week, it's a lot of data to have to juggle and to have to keep all these data points to try to show student growth from this to that. And it was very overwhelming for me, because music, in my understanding, is not a paper and pencil subject. At least not for the most part. Assessment looks differently in music than it does in other content areas. And so for me, it was like trying to fit a circle into a square peg. It just didn't fit. And I was constantly have to trying to either advocate that I was doing assessment and here's how it looked in my classroom, which we'll talk about later in this webinar, but also just trying to fit what I was doing and morph it to make other people who didn't see what I was doing as assessment in the music classroom naturally, to try to get them to see that yes, this is assessment, though it looks differently than you would see in a general classroom, for instance. And so that's kind of my personal experience with assessment. It was something that I constantly, it was always a professional kind of a growth point for me, is to be better at assessment. How can I, save time with assessments? How can I make sure that I adequately know what my students are learning and where they are in their learning process, and so on and so forth. And we're going to talk a little bit about some ways to help with that as we go along. So, and to kind of wrap up this kind of purpose of assessment, I also found another quote by Victoria Bowler that I thought was really telling about what assessment does for us as teachers. And she said that when our assessments are thoughtfully constructed and consistently implemented, they give us a direct picture of our effectiveness as educators. And I think that oftentimes we forget that piece of assessment, that assessment for us as teachers is feedback of how we are doing, and how we are getting our students from point A to point B. Again, how good is that bridge that we are making for them through their learning process to get from point A to point B. And that's feedback for us as educators on the effectiveness of our job and how well we are doing. And if things aren't going well, if our bridge isn't making it quite to point B, how are we going to re-teach us a concept of music? Or how are we going to redirect our students around an obstacle that they're not understanding to get to that point B, so that they do know the content and they are able to master the standards. And I really like that quote by Victoria. And so I wanted to share that with you before we move on. So I hope that kind of laid some groundwork for you on what this webinar is going to be talking about. As we move forward, we're going to talk about the different types of assessments. For this section, what I wanted to do was to split up each different type of assessment, meaning diagnostic, formative, and summative, and kind of just go over the broad definition, the main purpose of the assessment type in the classroom, and then just some basic evidence of them being used effectively in the classroom. And then I wanted to apply that directly into the music classroom broadly across all music content areas, meaning general music, music technology, band, chorus, orchestra, and then list some general examples for those, and some examples actually from the music classroom itself that can either make you think, oh, I do something similar that in my classroom, I didn't really see that as a diagnostic assessment, or maybe provide you with some inspiration to add some of these kind of concepts into your own music classrooms, regardless of what content area you teach in music. And so first, we're going to talk about diagnostic assessment and how it applies in the music classroom and how we can use that information to inform our instruction. So for diagnostic assessment, the main, or the broad definition, I should say, across any education content area is really just about a variety of formal and informal tasks that we as teachers use to determine where our students are at, like what's their level of knowledge, what skills do they have, and what understandings do they have at the beginning of a course, or a grade level, or a unit, or a lesson itself. And so the main purpose of that is it allows us to pre-assess our students prior to what we are going to be teaching them, so we get a clear picture of what they know and what they don't know. And that really allows us to adjust the curriculum to really meet the needs of the students. And remember, like, diagnostic assessments happen prior to us actually teaching a concept or a skill in music. And they're not necessarily used for grading purposes. It's really just some feedback for us as teachers to know, again, where our students are in their understanding. And so some evidences of effective use in the classroom is things like teachers, we can identify individual and as individuals, and then as a class, their strengths and their weaknesses, and how we can prepare our instruction so that we can help support those strengths and weaknesses, whether that is through extension or through challenging them to do more difficult or more advanced level musical concepts, or we need to kind of remediate some information for them in their weaknesses so that we can build them up through their musical understandings. And so it also means that teachers, we can identify and we can correct misconceptions. Maybe, a student, for instance, might have an understanding, a different understanding of dynamics. It's really not what dynamics is about. So if we know that information, we can kind of make sure that we identify those misconceptions and make sure that we teach that so that the students know what the correct term or the correct concept that we're talking about in music, for instance. The next one is teachers can explain how the classroom instruction has been adapted. This is mainly for maybe for differentiation purposes, but also for us to kind of advocate that, no, as a music teacher, I am advocating for my program, and I'm making sure that my students are getting the best music education no matter where they are in their learning process and their kind of, what level of knowledge or skill that they have. And I think that's really important for administrators to see that we are doing that in our classroom. It just looks a little bit differently. But that's a big piece of evidence for you to use maybe on your TEKS evaluations, that here's how I'm actually, adapting my curriculum to meet the various needs of my students that are in my classroom. And so the last one is, the teacher can use the diagnostic assessment to introduce new or maybe unknown concepts or not as familiar concepts in a music lesson, almost as like a hook or an attention grabber at the beginning of a lesson or a unit, to kind of pique their interest and engage them and like, oh, well, I didn't really know about this kind of thing or this particular genre of music or something like that, and it kind of acts as like that hook or attention grabber for a lesson. And so again, I have some general applications in the music classroom. Many of these that you see on the right side of your screen can be applied to multiple music content areas, whether that's general music or band or orchestra or chorus or music tech. And that's kind of the point of this, is that I just wanted to kind of label what some of these are so that maybe, even though you may be a band teacher, you see an example of a diagnostic assessment in a music technology classroom and kind of pull those ideas and use that in your classroom as well, just to kind of amp up your assessment arsenal, for lack of better words, in your classroom. And so one of the main ones is just kind of open classroom discussion, maybe some prompting questions just to kind of gauge where your students' understanding of whatever topic you're talking about, either a musical activity or a task for them to do, and see how well they can perform that task. A lot of the times diagnostic assessments are what we think about as a pre-assessment or a pre-test that involves an element or more than one element of music, and we use that that feedback and that kind of how well they scored on the pre-assessment to inform our instruction. And we more than likely, if we're given that sort of pre-test or that pre-assessment, that same test will come back so that we can show student growth. So pre-assessments are a really great way to measure students' growth in various ways in the music classroom. Things like polls, surveys, KWL charts. If you don't know what that is, it's a chart basically in 3 sections. It's like, what do I know about a topic? What do I wonder, or what do I want to know about a topic? And then what did I learn about the topic? And so it's a great way to kind of conceptualize those inner thoughts that your students might be having. And these are kind of things that can happen over the course um, of a unit or a lesson. It's like, well, what do I know about melody, for instance, or pitch, and then what do I wonder about pitch? And that's kind of um, as they're learning about pitch and stuff like that, maybe they have a question and they're writing these things down, these kind of like wonderings about the topic of pitch for this example. And then at the end of the kind of unit or the lesson, they have like a time of reflection of, okay, well, what did I learn about pitch that I didn't know before? So it kind of wraps all of those kind of ideas around of like diagnostic assessment and things like that. It kind of also can be blended into formative assessment and summative assessment with those KWL charts, but they're really a great way to see kind of, again, that diagnostic assessment of what your students know at the beginning. And maybe that's your use of that as a diagnostic assessment at the beginning, is just, we're just going to fill out the K part, the know. What do I know? And then you look back at that feedback, and then, okay, so my students know kind of a lot more than I thought they did on pitch, and so you adjust your curriculum and the concept of pitch in this example again, and then you continue on, and then maybe you bring it back. Okay, well, if you have a question about pitch, write the question down, and I wonder what happens if blank happens for pitch to change or something, as an example. And so then at the end of the unit or the lesson, you kind of bring that KWL chart back and, okay, well, what did I learn, kind of to wrap up the student learning and see what the students actually are able to, give back to you as a way of like almost like teaching you about what they learned and stuff like that. So that's what a KWL chart. I mean, there's a ton of different ways you could do that. You could do it digitally using free things like Padlets, or you could do it on a piece of paper, or you can do it in whatever your school district's method of online or digital work, whether that's Microsoft Teams or Google Docs, things like that. Doing it that way, it just kind of depends on how you want to do that. But there's a lot of examples of what those look like if you just Google KWL charts, so that you can get a better picture of what that looks like. Things like self-evaluation rubrics, having that at the beginning of a unit, just to kind of see what students feel personally about what they do know about a certain topic. Music aptitude tests, if you have any of those available. A performance activity such as sight reading, or if you have placement auditions for things like orchestra or band or things like that, where they have to perform, and then based on that performance, you again get that feedback of where they are in their understanding or performance or skill level, whatever they're at. Things like multiple choice, listening activities, and visual observations. And so I have some examples that you can see here. The first one is basically just a very simple multiple choice kind of pencil paper kind of thing and it's a listening activity too, so it's kind of 2 in 1 combined. It's just asking kids, what do they hear when you are listening to a particular piece of music? Are you hearing presto, moderato, adagio in regards to tempo and things like that? And they have to circle, and then you get that feedback of what do they know, what the the Italian term for tempo is, and then can they apply that term to what they're listening to. So that's an example. Another one is an orchestra example, and it's a kind of informal and formal diagnostic, where they have to use correct fingering patterns to when they're performing scales. And so that first kind of informal diagnostic is just having them close their eyes and finger on the finger pattern, excuse me. And then the teacher is just kind of glancing around and evaluating what the students, kind of checking off what students, if they know the correct fingering pattern, and then a more formal diagnostic assessment for that same standard or learning target. It's just, they submit a selfie or some sort of video of them demonstrating those finger patterns, and so things like that. And then there's also some great online tools that are really engaging for students, free websites like Kahoot. I have a quick little video here from one of our teachers who is one of our professional learning communities on our virtual platform called GaDOE Community. She is giving a diagnostic assessment or a pre-assessment, you could say, using Kahoot, and she's using it in a way where she's just kind of gathering what students know from previous musical experiences and what they don't know, but it's through this really engaging platform called Kahoot. So we'll take a look at that, and then we'll move on to formative assessment.
If you will get out your electronic device, you can work in pairs. If you do not have an electronic device, we're going to play Kahoot to see what you all remember about dynamics. Alrighty. So we're talking about dynamics. Let's see what you remember from elementary school, or see what you remember from somebody. What does pianissimo mean? Is this in your way? Okay.
Oh, I remember these from 5th grade.
Nice job. Nice job. It means very soft. And if you thought it was soft, you're not too far off, because it actually does mean some form of soft.
The bars.
Just very soft.
The bars are not good.
Nice job. Medium loud is mezzo forte. Mezzo piano is the word. It's the Italian word. Alrighty, I see y'all on a reg race here.
I hope you enjoyed that little clip from the course classroom where the teacher was just trying to do an engaging diagnostic assessment just to kind of gauge her students' understanding of dynamics. And if you noticed, it was probably chaotic in there, you know, students working with each other. They're all on, you know, either their own devices or sharing devices with other students and collaborating. So it probably seemed really chaotic, but the more important part of that diagnostic, or that, you know, engaging pre-assessment, you could say, was the feedback that the teacher was getting. So after every question that she was asking on the, you know, the free Kahoot platform, she was getting feedback, whether that was most of the class understood, you know, what pianissimo meant, for instance. But there's a couple of handful of others who, you know, didn't understand that. She's probably thinking in her head throughout this activity, like, oh, okay, I need to revisit what all of the topics of, what all of the labels and the terms for dynamics in Italian are in music, just as either a refresher course, you know, a quick little refresher lesson for students, or some, you know, student might have never heard these before. So it's a way to see what students don't know and what they do know, and then plan your instruction as you continue on through the student's learning process. For formative assessment, it really, the definition is just a wide variety of, again, formal and informal methods that are used throughout a unit or a course of study. And the big idea here is to monitor student progress so that you, the teacher, can adjust your instructional practices to meet the needs of the student. So again, the main purpose with this is that, you know, formative assessments are monitoring the student's progress and providing students with effective and timely feedback, you know, like just-in-time feedback, reteaching if you need to catch students up, or to teach in a different way so that students understand if that's necessary, and then predicting performance on summative assessments. So a lot of the times, you know, when we're doing whatever kind of either formal or informal, you know, formative assessments, especially in music, this is probably where we do a lot of our assessing for the most part. The kind of like the day in and day out of assessment is probably informal assessment and formative assessment. So we do a lot in this kind of like realm of, or this type of assessment. And there's various ways that we do that. But some evidence that it's effective in the classroom setting is that teachers, you can state the types of formative assessments that you're using regularly. Again, these look different in music, so sometimes that you may have to you know, have discussions with administrators or parents, for instance, about how you are tracking the students' progress or monitoring how well they're doing in your classroom. And you're, explaining how you've revised your instructional kind of plan based on the formative assessment. So if we kind of think about the whole like trajectory of assessment, you've done the diagnostic, you've understand what your students know and you don't know, you start plan your instruction for per curriculum with the standards all involved and things like that. But then some students may not be getting it, and you're understanding, you're monitoring that progress, and then adjusting your instructional plan that you already have set to make sure that you're reaching all of those students wherever they are in their learning progress. And then one of the big things is we're providing just-in-time and direct feedback constantly, and I think this is a very big thing in music that we kind of take for granted because it's very natural for us, but it is a form of assessment. When you have a student in orchestra who's playing flat, you tell the student immediately, hey, you're playing a little flat, make sure you tune properly. If you have a student in general music who's not singing in their head voice, for instance, taking the time to say, hey, flipping up to your head voice and talking about that and how to do that, like those things that are happening directly in time, that is a form of assessment, and it's a form of like informal formative if you think about it, because it's almost like an instant kind of check as a teacher. Okay, so if they're not understanding or they're not able to apply a certain knowledge to a skill, how am I going to get that student there? And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier about, revising your instructional plan to meet those needs of your students. Another one is you can show, examples of students' revised work. Say you have a playing test or a singing test, and you can show through multiple occasions how they have improved on a playing test, whether that is through tempo or tone, if you're looking about that, intonation, things like that as examples. And then teachers, you can describe students' strengths and their weaknesses and then continue in that. What are the next steps to get them even further? So those are just some basic evidences of that, or you're effectively using, formative assessments in your classroom. So on the left side of the screen, you see I have, again, some applications in the music classroom. Again, these are broad across all content areas of music, but I have split them into some informal formative and formal formative. And so we're going to talk about those a little bit right now. Informal formative assessments really, to me, when I think about that and how I would do it in my own classroom, they were not necessarily assessments that I would be like scoring or writing down. They were more conversation, feedback-based kind of assessments in quote, that provided me with an understanding of where my students were. Again, the point of formative assessment is you're monitoring student progress. So with informal, it was more feedback-based, in my opinion, where I was, and it's kind of what I was talking about earlier, that just-in-time direct feedback, where I see an issue, give the student feedback and constructive feedback, and then hopefully from that feedback that they continue to progress in their learning. So these can be super quick. Again, I think we do these naturally in our classroom, and we do them frequently. And I think it's important to kind of pinpoint exactly what some of these are, because you may not realize that, oh, that is a informal formative assessment. I just wasn't even thinking about it like that. Because I do think, again, that they come so naturally to us, but maybe they're not so natural to other people, or people who aren't as knowledgeable about, music education in general. So when we talk about informal formative, things like verbal or nonverbal responses, the kind of like the show me as the teacher, show me this, show me that, show me how you do this, or show me, using thumbs up, thumbs down, thumb sideways, for instance, how you're feeling about this topic or whatever activity. Things like, in orchestra doing air bowing, and show me air bowing in whatever activity you're doing or music you're learning. I know another big thing is like monkey see, monkey do. Okay, I'm going to do something, then I want you to do it directly back to me. whether that's in band or orchestra or chorus or general music or music tech, whatever. That's a way of informally assessing our students. Even things through like just observing students as they're working is a way to, inform your instruction in an informal way through that kind of formative assessment. And things like questioning students, that could be during discussion time, that could be more individual, group based. It just kind of depends on how you do it. And even conferencing with students and making sure that, okay, here, actually taking the time, which could be quite difficult for us because we do see a lot of students at the same time, obviously, but taking the time to conference with some students and say, okay, here's where I see you and here's where we need to be, and let's talk about how we're going to get there, that kind of thing with conferencing. In addition, continuing to do polls and surveys, self-assessments, peer observation, and constructive feedback. Another way to think about that informal assessment is just think, pair, share, which is a great educational tool no matter what content area you teach, but just allowing students to kind of think about whether it's a question or a topic or an assignment or an activity you're doing in the classroom. Think about it, talk about it with other people, and then share it out for the whole class. I think of stations or centers. This is maybe more directly related to general music, but could be applied if you were creative enough to think about it in that way. But centers and stations are kind of an informal way because you're not specifically there to judge whether or not they are getting it right or wrong, but you're kind of observing the stations as they are happening, or the centers, whatever you want to call it, and just kind of observing, are they understanding what the concept is that is involved with the activity as they go around, and then providing them again feedback so that they can be successful at each station or center. And then just broadly, musical tasks and activities and games. I have some examples in the next slide that you'll see, and we'll kind of talk through about what those look like. But for now, we're going to go to formal formative assessments and talk about those. For formal formative assessments, these are more things that are, for lack of a better word, formal in nature, as opposed to more observational and feedback-based and informal formative assessments. These, to me, are things that are much more written down, or there's some sort of major performance task in which you're asking them to do it to track their progress. And there's a variety, again, of ways that we can do that in the music classroom across all content areas. And so some of them that I've listed here are journaling or some sort of written response. Maybe you have students who keep a journal through their practice, like a practice journal or a practice log or something like that. And you're kind of checking to see where they are in their thought process as you do those, or give students some sort of written response, whether that's performance-based or actually a written response based on to some sort of writing prompt, to see if they understand the content that is being taught to them. Things like multiple choice or quizzes, whether those are graded or ungraded. You can grade formative assessments, but I don't think the purpose this time, at this point in the assessment process, is grading. They can be graded if you need the grades, but to me, formative kind of equals feedback. So it's feedback directly to the students, or it's feedback to you, the teacher, of where your students are in their progress of learning. And so sometimes that can look like doing a performance task with checklists to go with those. Exit tickets, we'll see some examples of those in the next slide, where students have to perform something in some way, and this can be done in a variety of ways before they leave the classroom. Doing playing tests with rubric and doing playing tests in multiple instances to track progress, and we'll find some examples of what that looks like. Any kind of, again, sort of musical tasks or activities or games where you can check off whether a student has where they are in the process. Have they mastered a certain skill, or are they close, almost there to mastering that skill? They just need more time. And then in regards to performing ensembles with pre-evaluation concerts and using a rubric in various times before that you have those large group evaluations performances, and having concerts before that in their kind of self-assessment pre-evaluation concerts or performances, and you're just kind of tracking where the students are using a rubric and through that whole process. And so in the next slide, we have a couple of different examples, again, across all music content areas, and I'm just going to share with you and talk to you a little bit about that. So here's the examples I have that are both informal and formal that I wanted to include for you on here. And so the first one is a quick little video in a general music classroom. It is a singing game called Doggy Doggy, Where's Your Bone? And the point, it looks like it is a game. If somebody came into it, it just looked like kids having fun, playing a singing game. But really on the teacher side of things, the teacher was most likely listening to that student in the middle who is the soloist, even though it's disguised in this kind of singing game activity with the students. But this teacher was more than likely listening. Were the students singing the appropriate pitches? Were they singing in their head voice? Were they able to sing by themselves, which is a scary thing to do when you're young in a general music classroom. So that's probably what is going on in the teacher's head on the side of it. So I wanted to show you a little clip about what that looks like.
Here we go.
Doggy, doggy, where's your bone? Somebody stole it from your home. Stole my bone. I stole your bone.
Okay, so next we have an example of a more formative kind of rubric assessment from a music technology classroom. You can see that on the left side here, there is the standards and the kind of the learning targets within those standards with the potential score, the grade, and the comments. Now this could truly be graded, or it could be given, the students could be given a grade without, actually recording the grade, but it's again more feedback based. So the teacher can use that comment section on the right side to give students feedback on a project. Maybe this is kind of a checkpoint in the project kind of process, and giving this, you might just give it directly back to the students with the comments so that they can continue to grow in their project making or project developing and understanding of the concept and the standards that they're trying to master through the project. So here's an example of what that rubric looks like, a more formal way to assess students. The next one we have is a general music example again. This is an exit ticket. The students, as a part of this lesson, they had to create an 8-beat rhythm, and then they had to associate the symbols with, the rhythm symbols with the syllables of the words that are in animal names. And then the exit ticket part, before the students left, each student had to perform their kind of, animal rap, you could say, or animal rhythms before they left the classroom. As they kind of, they handed their paper to the teacher, they performed their rhythms. If they did it correctly, great. They would leave the classroom. If they made a mistake, they would go back to the end of the classroom or the end of the line, and then have another attempt. And again, that's a more, it's kind of both a formative and an informal way to see if students understand the concept. And then it's really good feedback for the teacher if you see a student who can write the rhythm and they got that part right, but then they're having trouble actually performing the rhythm that they wrote. That's a kind of an indicator for the teacher. I was like, okay, we need to work on, actually reading the rhythms and then performing the rhythms themselves and connecting those kind of concepts together. So next we have some examples from band. This one is a listening map project where the students had to listen to Molly on the Shore by Percy Granger and create a listening map for someone else to be able to watch and kind of track along with them as they listened to it. Someone else was listening to it. This is a great way to assess whether students can recognize, musical contrasts, and how they can do musical contrasts in different ways to help people listen to music and find different important parts of music and concepts that you're learning about and applying that to an actual piece of music itself. And then the other band example we have is again, a rubric, another formal kind of formative assessment, just on playing tests. And not only are they having to play in various keys, but then they get bonus points for, applying different tempos to it to increase the tempo, the speed at which they can play their scores. And it's a great way to just track where the students are in their kind of, playing test learning and learning scales and stuff like that. There's another general music example, and I wanted to highlight this one because it is a checklist. And this checklist is basically all of the standards that are covered in a particular unit. In this case, it's a kindergarten general music classroom. You'll notice that at the top, right above all the grid lines, you'll see the specific standard label so that you could actually go back and see which one it is. But this is a way to track, a more, again, formal way to track students' progress through a particular unit. Based on each standard is a great way to do that. That could be a simple check mark, or cross out an X on each box for which student, and it kind of gives you a grand picture of where your class is at in particular from class to class, and kind of continue to track through the course of a unit or a lesson or even this whole school year if you wanted to. And then we also have a middle school chorus example. They are actually doing a project where they're having to sight read a very simple melodic phrase and figure out what that is, and then sing it with appropriate pitches and either solfege or the numbers system. Each part of the wall there was a different melody. Go back, try to figure it out, come back and sing it to the teacher as a kind of a way to formally or informally assess whether the students can apply the understanding of reading melodies, and then to actually performing a written melody themselves. So those were just some examples of some informal and formal types of assessing that can happen throughout all content areas in the music classroom. Next, we're going to go into summative assessments. For summative assessments, we use them mainly as a tool to evaluate student learning, skill acquisition, and just overall academic achievement at the end of an instructional period, whether that is at the end of a project or a unit or a course of study, a semester, a program, or even a whole school year. And so really the main purpose is that measure of student growth. How well did students perform from point A to point B? That diagnostic assessment that you gave them all the way to the end with the summative assessment. And so really summative assessments can also be used in kind of that same way as a method of determining instructional and curriculum effectiveness. Was I, the teacher, doing my job effectively to get student from point A to point B? If my students didn't do as good as I had hoped at the summative assessment, whatever that summative assessment may have been, then I need to reevaluate my instructional practices in the curriculum to make sure that I get them there. So you may have to go back and reteach sections, and that's totally okay. But it also can predict future success of other standards. Well, if my students are really good at performing particular rhythms in particular, then they may be good at performing melody based on the feedback that I got as a teacher from the rhythm summative assessment, if that makes sense. And so some general evidences of effective use in the classroom can be that you, the teacher, can explain to whoever, parents, administrators, which students may need additional support and instruction to reach mastery. Because, in the perfect world, we would want all of our students to do well on their summative assessment, but that's not always the case. So what do you do when you have a student who does not perform as well on a summative assessment? Well, you need to go back and reteach them. So, but you can identify them because you're giving these summative assessments. The next one is you can describe learning adjustments that were made to the instruction from beginning to end. So from the diagnostic through the formative into the summit, you can tell administrators or parents how you specifically changed the your instructional plan that you had for your students based on the feedback that you got from all of these different assessments. And then you can show, again, that student growth using various methods of summative assessments. And so those are just ways that we can kind of almost have a clear picture, a clear snapshot of their effective use in the classroom. And so now on the right side of the screen, we have some, again, general applications in the music classroom, regardless of content area. So those are things like an end of unit test or a quiz or some sort of culminating musical project that you've been working on and giving feedback to students with throughout the course of a unit. Maybe they have written and performed musical compositions, so they have kind of written it, but then they can apply that knowledge through performance and the skill to do that. Whether they have some presentations or they have portfolios where you can showcase all of your students' work to parents and administrators and things like that. Playing tests, giving a post-assessment, and any other performance-based musical tasks that you may give your students that have to do with a rubric or a checklist or some sort of, post-assessment self-evaluation and things like that. So in the next couple of slides, I have some examples, like I've done in the previous assessment slides, that I wanted to share with you. So let's check them out. So one of the easiest ways that I found to measure student growth in music in particular is by giving pre-tests as a diagnostic assessment or a pre-assessment, and then giving that same test, making no changes to it at the end of a unit or a lesson or whatever kind of time span that we're looking at here. And then comparing the scores, and that's just hard data that you can get. Now there's many ways that you can do this. You can do this the whole pencil and paper route. That's totally fine. Or you can do it on digital platforms with using different apps and stuff like that that can do all of the mathematical work for you, because let's be real, we teach a lot of kids at once. But I wanted to highlight, I had this in the diagnostic assessment slide, and I wanted to bring it back to the summative assessment, because you would hope that after you've taught all of these musical expression terms that you see on your screen right now, that at the end they would get all 100 because of your teaching was so effective, right? And so that's kind of why I wanted to bring it back for the summative assessment, to show that measure of student growth from kind of point A to point B, and what percentage did they grow based on the effectiveness of your teaching. And so some more examples that we have on the screen is one from a music technology class, and it is a kind of a culminating music project. And you can see where they have the different tracks and kind of all stacked on top of each other as a representation, I should say, of their music final music project. But I wanted to show you this because the rubric that we saw in the formative assessment that we said could be graded or could not be graded was used on the same project. It was kind of a continual rubric that was used as a formative checklist and feedback from the teacher, but then it was also used as the definitive grade at the end of the project. And so that same rubric was informative for students because it told them what they needed to do in order to get their best score, but it also provided opportunity for feedback for the teacher to help the student get to that point. And so it's always nice for students to always have the rubric so they know exactly what you are expecting as a teacher to get to where they need to be in order to master all those different standards that were listed and always tied to the standards. And so I wanted to show that kind of the final project, or the end product of that musical project on the music technology side. And then this picture of this band performance that we see here, this again could be seen as a way of summative assessment, not only, a final concert of the year, whether that's, a final fall concert or a spring concert or an end of the year celebration concert, whatever the case may be. That could also be seen as a summative assessment because you could have students evaluate their own performance through self-evaluations or peer observations or group evaluations of their performance. And it would be really cool, I think, to have them kind of record them sight reading a piece of music as a diagnostic assessment, and then recording the final performance as a summative assessment, and then showing the students and having them compare the two performances and how much growth happened from the diagnostic, that first sight reading performance of a band or orchestra piece, whatever the case may be, and then showing them how much they have grown because they can play the piece at the end of the performance, or the unit or the course of study. So you can do that in multiple ways, through self-evaluation. There's standards on evaluating music and music performances, the Georgia Standards of Excellence. So using those standards as a method of summative assessment themselves. So the last example I have for you is a beginning chorus 1 evaluation form. And this is, again, is a summative assessment where students are evaluating their own performance. And so based on the criteria, again, always connected to the standards, they give their performance a rating from 1 to 5 based on certain criteria such as pitch accuracy or diction, blend, things like that. And then they have the opportunity to write comments about that, and then answer some brief, written responses questions. And then also giving them opportunity to rate things like audience etiquette and performer etiquette, which are also connected to our standards. So I just wanted to provide you with another way of, kind of self and peer evaluation or group evaluation, and what that can look like in a written form. This could totally be done in a digital way if you have that capability. There's many ways you can do summative assessments, and I just wanted to provide you with a handful of them as examples, and kind of use them to pull them from different places and different content areas that you may not be familiar with or have thought about, and maybe you can use those in your content area to improve your assessments in your own classrooms. I want to take some time now to talk about some general assessment tips or considerations, or just things to think about as you begin to use kind of some of the things that we've talked about in this webinar into your own classrooms, and that assessment planning process, the choosing which assessment strategies you want to use in your classrooms, and how you're going to use that assessment data or feedback to inform your instruction. And so one of the main ones that I can provide you with, and something that really was transformational for me as a teacher, was understanding the difference between knowledge and skill. I think a lot of people use them synonymously when really they're not the same thing. And so don't confuse knowledge and skill. Because just because a student can identify a rhythmic symbol, for instance, that's knowledge. I can have a student point to a 16th note on a piece of paper. That is knowledge. That does not mean necessarily that the student can apply that knowledge into a performance of some kind. That's the skill, right? To be able to play or sing that note on the paper. That's the skill that we're looking for. And so they're not the same thing. And I just kind of want to drive that point. When I kind of found that out personally, it was, like I was saying, a very transformational moment, because I was like, oh, I'm sitting there quizzing them on knowledge, but I'm not really quizzing them on the skill that it takes to master that standard. And so it's always a good idea to make sure that your assessments are directly connected to the standards, and that when you develop and you're creating and you're facilitating these assessments, that they are created in such a way in which the students are actively using the musical knowledge that you've given them through performance of some kind. That's the skill, right? So assessments really should always be skill-based. Now, that's not to say that you can have knowledge-based assessments, things like diagnostic or some formative assessments where you're kind of tracking whether they understand the basic musical knowledge or concepts. But really, that summative, that final performance or project or whatever you're using in your classroom really should be about using the skills that they've developed through understanding of that musical knowledge. And so the second point I want to talk about is about mediums and modes of assessment. And so there, in music, there is a plethora of different mediums and modes in which we can use to assess our students. And when I'm talking about mediums, I'm talking about things like, are you going to assess your students using pencil and paper? Are you going to assess your students using body signals, kind of like we talked about earlier with thumbs up, thumbs down, sideways, or numbers, or whatever? Are you going to assess them through technology? Are you going to assess them through performance? And it's kind of the way you are delivering the assessment to your students. That's the kind of thing you can think about. And then the modes is and then the modes, you're talking about kind of the singing, playing instruments, improvising. Are they listening to music? Or are they moving to music, as etc., as an example? And so these can vary greatly between music content area, different grade levels, even between classes in the same grade level, and even from student to student. So don't forget that you can differentiate the assessments that you're creating in your classroom using these different kinds of methods to meet the students where they are. Because one student may, one student may excel with pencil and paper work, whereas another student, that just doesn't work. They can, or maybe a student can't, is apprehensive about that pencil and paper work, but they excel at singing, for instance, and they're still showing the same amount of skill or knowledge, whatever kind of assessment you're doing, they're just doing it in a different way. And so I just kind of want to provide that kind of spark of, oh, well, not every assessment has to be the same or look the same in each grade level, each content area, each from student to student or class to class. And so you can differentiate those assessments to meet the needs of your students. And so really kind of the big question to think about for this part is just, how am I, the teacher, allowing my students to show me what they know and being able to do it successfully, I think is an important part of kind of creating and developing those assessments. The third thing I want to talk about is keeping the grading time in mind. The goal is to collect the evidence or the data or the feedback of the student learning. It's not getting burnt out. And for me, I was getting burnt out with assessments. So a lot of the time I was trying to figure out how I was going to get so much assessment data points due to the sheer numbers of students I saw in the shortest amount of time. And so, I think that, obviously it's important to notate where your students are in their learning process, but it just needs to be done in a manageable way. And I wish I could provide you with ways that you could do that, but it really just works and looks differently from teacher to teacher. I know some teachers do it a certain way. Some teachers, do it a different way. For me, something that was beneficial was, doing, if I was giving some sort of formative assessment and having students with a thumbs up or thumbs down, for instance, I was only marking down the students who had their thumbs down, because it was easier, because those numbers were usually smaller, that I could say, okay, well, I need to go back and reteach this content or this concept in some way to reach those students who did have their fingers down, and so on and so forth. So that's a way that kind of helped me in my assessment data collection or grading process, for instance, for one type of assessment. And so data takes time to record, but the information that we do get from it is beneficial for us, and it's worth it for us to know where our students are in their learning. And another big thing is, I think a lot of the times we think, oh, assessment is a test. I have to stop everything we're doing and give this test, or give this formative assessment, whatever. But you don't always necessarily have to stop class to assess. You can be assessing in the activities that you plan in your classroom as well. That can look differently. Maybe the assessment happens after school via students submitting video, especially now during this kind of time of virtual or digital learning. It just kind of depends on your situation, what's going to work best for you, and how you're best going to do it in a way that is not going to burn you out and you're doing it in a manageable time. So next, I want to just mention, assessment should never embarrass a student. When we plan assessments, we're always trying to set them up for success as opposed to failure. And so when we have an assessment in which a student may feel nervous or anxious about maybe it's performing a solo in front of their peers or something like that, and they're uncomfortable doing that, more than likely they're going to fail because they're uncomfortable. So how can you actively plan for those instances? Well, in an assessment where you still get to assess the student, but maybe it's just in a different way that sets them up for success. I know a lot of the times in my case, I had students who were afraid to sing alone, and so instead of forcing them to sing alone or embarrassing them through the process of, okay, you need to sing, everybody, we're going to wait here until you sing, like that's not a good kind of method, or you're not really setting that student up for success. So in my case, what I would do is either have the student sing it in my ear, or play it for me after class if it was on an instrument, for instance, or maybe I sing with them, and I'm singing quietly so I can hear them, or maybe they're singing with a peer, so I'm hearing both students at the same time. It just kind of depended on the student and the environment. There's different ways that you can still set up students for success and not embarrass them through the assessment process. And so again, part of that too, the second bullet point there, is just kind of developing that, just a sense of safety in your classroom through just kind of creating a positive learning environment. That was super important to me as a teacher, and having teachable moments about why we don't laugh or make comments or about students who are trying to do their best when they're performing and things like that, and just kind of creating that safe space so that they feel comfortable enough to make mistakes, or if they do make a mistake, that they're not worried or fearful of rejection from their fellow peers, in the classroom through that assessment. Lastly, assessments are incredibly valuable in the field of music education, but they're also not perfect and they're limited. Assessments can't truly tell us the expanse of what a student does or doesn't know in music. And it can only tell us how well a student performed on that particular assessment that you gave them. And so what I mean by this is that, we should use that feedback or that data that we get from that assessment to ultimately drive our instruction. And so let's say a student really excelled in one assessment. Well, how do we challenge them further past that assessment? Well, can they transfer that knowledge into another form of assessment? Things like that. Or if a student did not quite make, they don't quite understand enough, and you get that feedback from that assessment, then how are you going to use that feedback or that data from that assessment to reteach, kind of like we were talking about earlier in the webinar, to reteach a concept, or to maybe there's some sort of obstacle that they're just not understanding our concept, and how we are going to kind of rework our teaching so that they can be successful in that assessment. So assessments are great. We obviously see the value in assessing our students, but realizing that is a moment in time of that student's learning, kind of like a snapshot, a picture of their performance in your classroom. And so how are you going to use that snapshot to propel them further into music making, into their music learning, and just general appreciation in music going further from there. And so those are just some general tips that I thought could be beneficial just to kind of think about and ponder as you continue on in your journey in assessment in your own music classroom and in your own music content area. just take this kind of reflect on them and try to implement some of these kind of ideas and, assessment concepts into your own music classroom as you move forward. Next, we're going to talk about some of the great resources that we have available to you for free from the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts team. So let's hear about some of those. In response to the need to have content-specific training for the fine arts, the Georgia Department of Education saw the need to hire staff members to represent the 3 largest fine arts content areas in Georgia. As a result, this is the fine arts team at the Georgia Department of Education. First is Jessica Booth, our fine arts program manager who has a background in the visual and media arts. Next is Paul McLean. As a fine arts program specialist, he has a background in theater and film. And as I stated earlier, I'm Casey Hall, a fine arts program specialist who has a background in music. As a team, our main goal is to support fine arts teachers from across the state of Georgia by providing relevant and informative, content-specific professional development opportunities, high-quality instructional resources for the fine arts, and opportunities for collaboration and connection amongst fine arts teachers from all over the state of Georgia. Here at the Georgia Department of Education, our goal is to support you in as many ways as we possibly can. And so in doing so, we have developed some music instructional resources for the following courses so that you can pull from them if you ever need to. We have them for general music, grades kindergarten through 6th grade, with grades 7th and 8th coming soon, band, chorus, orchestra, music technology, social emotional learning, and life skills in music for grades kindergarten through 5th grade, and we have some remote or digital learning plans currently available to you. For each content area, the instructional resources include curriculum maps, which map out the learning that will happen over the course of a whole school year. Each curriculum map consists of a list of standards and elements for each unit, and then key components that will be covered in each unit. Within those curriculum maps are unit plans, and within each unit plan, it includes a unit focus, standards and elements that are listed by artistic processes, a list of lesson plans within that unit, example assessments, and a list of supplemental resources that are available within that unit itself. Within each unit plan are multiple lessons in which musical concepts are taught to students. Each lesson plan contains things like recommended pacing, enduring understanding, and technical focus, all Georgia Standards of Excellence covered within that lesson, sample assessments, major vocabulary and concepts, differentiated learning, teacher and student materials that are needed, as well as lesson structure, student and teacher procedures, essential questions, and the opening, creating, and closing sections of a lesson plan. Most lesson plans include an accompanying PowerPoint presentation, student manipulatives, handouts, worksheets, and activities that you can use in your own music classrooms if you choose to do so. The instructional resources for music also include several sample assessments such as diagnostic, formative, and summative, and some of the ones that we talked about earlier in this webinar that you can pull from and use and edit as needed in your own music classrooms. So where do you find all of these great resources? Well, there's a couple of ways that you can find them. The first way is to go through your school district's SLDS or statewide longitudinal data system platform, the one where your TEKS observations are housed, and click on TRL or Teacher Resource Link. Then using filters, you can search for instructional resources within your own music content area. The second is to go to georgiastandards.org and click on the direct link to the public TRL as shown in the image on the left. The easiest way to find these instructional resources for music is by going to your preferred search engine and typing in GaDOE Fine Arts in the search box and clicking the first link that you see on the results page. This will take you directly to our website. If you scroll down the page, you'll see our upcoming professional development opportunities as well as any previously recorded webinars that you may have missed. And don't worry if you did. You can request access links to these recordings to view on your own time. As you continue to scroll, you'll find the instructional resources for grades K through 12. Clicking on the link will take you to a downloadable hyperlink document with all of the types of resources that were discussed earlier in this presentation for you to pull assessment activities, strategies, resources, and examples for you to use in your own music classrooms should you ever need to do so. In addition to these great resources and professional development, we also have an exciting opportunity that we hope you participate in. Take a look at this quick commercial that explains more about this opportunity on GaDOE Community. Do you oftentimes feel lonely in your school building or district as a fine arts educator?
Do you find it hard to feel supported by teachers and administrators who don't fully understand our specialized fine arts content areas?
Do you ever wish there was support, guidance, and even encouragement from other fine arts teachers and fine arts administrators from across the state of Georgia?
Do you crave collaboration and connection with other like-minded fine arts teachers? Then we have the perfect place for you. Hey everyone, and welcome to GaDOE Community. My name is Casey Hall, and I am one of the Fine Arts Education Program Specialists here at the Georgia Department of Education. For most content areas, there are teams of teachers either in the school building or in the district that can provide one another with ways to collaborate, support, and connect so that they do not feel alone. However, for some fine arts teachers, we are often the only teacher in the school building and sometimes even in the district who teaches our specialized fine arts content areas. So it can sometimes feel rather lonely and difficult to find a community of teachers in our schools and districts that truly understand our unique perspective. With that being said, the Fine Arts team at the Georgia Department of Education wanted to offer fine arts teachers across the state of Georgia an opportunity to collaborate and connect. On GaDOE Community, fine arts teachers will be able to join groups of like-minded teachers who also teach their unique and specialized fine arts content areas to share thoughts, resources, strategies, and encouragement as a way of professional learning so that no one would have to feel alone. So what is GaDOE Community? It's a platform that has been developed by the Georgia Department of Education as a way to provide content-specific professional learning communities, or PLCs, for teachers across the state of Georgia to collaborate, connect, and support one another on a virtual platform. Much like social media platforms where you can join various groups on topics you are interested in, GaDOE Community offers teachers the chance to join communities of like-minded teachers in their own specific content areas to provide support and guidance, share ideas, resources, and strategies, and offer encouragement as needed for one another. So where do we sign up? It's easy. Head over to the GaDOE Community website at community.gadoe.org and create an account using your district, RESA, or DOE email account to be approved. Once you've logged in, take some time to explore the platform. Check out some of the cool collaboration features such as the newsfeed, where all of the activity on GaDOE Community is housed, much like a social media activity feed. Make your profile look awesome by uploading a professional picture of yourself, adding your nickname or handle, as well as any other information you'd like to add. Be sure to click on Groups and search for the Fine Arts community groups in which you'd want to join. If you get lost, check out the user guide for additional information on the platform.
Side effects of GaDOE Community include happiness, support, prosperity, collaboration, stress relief, joy, networking, peace of mind, guidance, euphoria, new friends, optimism, connection, prosperity, strong support system, advice when needed, new opportunities, professional growth, and much, much more.
If you have any questions or need additional support in navigating the GaDOE Community platform or creating an account, be sure to contact me either by using my email address below, or once you've created an account, message me on the platform and I'll respond to you as soon as I can. I can't wait to connect with you on the GaDOE Community platform, and I'll hopefully see you there soon. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that comical commercial about our current virtual professional learning communities on GaDOE Community. To briefly recap, GaDOE Community is a brand new platform just for Georgia teachers to communicate and collaborate with one another in a content-specific community groups. The groups we currently have available are General Music, Band, Chorus, Orchestra, and Music Technology. These groups are led by teacher leaders in their respective fields from across the state of Georgia and provide monthly recorded webinars for you to view at your own pace and engage in discussions and support as needed through these community groups. I urge you to sign up using your school district email account as soon as you can, as our monthly recorded webinars and discussion posts have already started. In fact, we have webinars currently on the topic of assessment within each music community group for you to watch to get a more content-specific look at assessment in your own music content area. A quick example of a webinar on assessment in the Music Technology Community Group on GaDOE Community.
Formative assessments are for students and teachers. And the one that gets more often forgot here is that formative assessments are for students, right? A lot of times people are like, well, the teacher needs to. And in your evaluations that you get at your school, the teacher needs to, or this was good for the teacher comes up a lot. But this type of assessment can be very helpful in helping students understand where they're struggling. Whoa. Students need to know what they're not good at? Yeah. Students need to understand where their deficiencies are in their learning. That way they can stop and focus on those deficiencies. So make sure that you take the time to help students understand where they're at based on their formative assessment results. Sometimes it's pretty easy. A 3-question quiz and they miss 2 questions about making rhythms. They know they need to focus more on rhythms, or making a baseline and it's staying in time or something like that. So just help the students understand in their assessments where they're at. Consider this for a moment. Have most of your formative assessments be about feedback and not about a grade.
Thank you so much for watching this webinar on assessment in the music classroom. My hopes are that you learned something, take some time to reflect on it, and begin to use the information discussed in this webinar to inform your own teaching practice and support your efforts to becoming the best music teacher you can be in order to reach and teach all students in your own music classrooms. Here's my contact information if you would like to discuss this further or have any questions. I'd love to chat. I would ask that if you have a moment to please fill out our brief feedback survey using a QR code reader or type the URL in your browser. One of our goals at the Georgia Department of Education Fine Arts team is to provide relevant and informative, content-specific professional development for fine arts teachers across the state, so any feedback you could provide us would be greatly appreciated and highly beneficial so that we can provide you with the best professional development possible. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day.